Good afternoon, Your Royal Highness. Thank you very much for having us this afternoon. Distinguished guests and my fellow panel members. My name is Shamiso Rujidzo. I'm a partnership specialist at the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. I will start by introducing our panel this afternoon on financing coastal resilience, de-risking nature-based solutions. I would first like to say that Dr. Shebnem Sena, who was on the agenda this afternoon to speak, unfortunately sends her sincere apologies as she's unwell and could not travel. However, on the panel today, I have UNDP, Miguel Solana, who is the Global Technical Lead on Insurance and Risk Finance. I have Dr. Ahmed Shouki from the Ministry of Environment, Egypt, who is a marine biologist. I have Renata Hachef, Vice President of Bankers Without Boundaries. And joining us online, I have Ariane Kalou, Head of Nature-Based Solutions from AXA Insurance. As mentioned this morning, we heard that we cannot achieve sustainable development without nature. Nature absorbs 60% of the world's carbon emissions and supports food, water, and global supply chains. Yet it continues to face severe risks from climate change, pollution, and ecosystem degradation. Nature-based solutions can protect, manage, and restore ecosystems, offering scalable, cost-effective pathways to enhance resilience and drive sustainable development. However, we are seeing that investment in nature-based solutions remains critically low to risk perceptions, limited cash flows, and weak enabling environments at times. Across this panel this afternoon, we have government, insurers, investors, and development voices to explore how insurance and risk financing can unlock investment in nature-based solutions for marine and coastal resilience. I'll refer to what His Excellency Dr. Nasser said this morning. He spoke about the importance of insurance and how innovative financial instruments like blue bonds and parametric insurance can support these efforts. With this, I will start with my first question to the panel. I'll start with you, Miguel. How is UNDP leveraging innovative financing instruments, including insurance and capacity building initiatives to support the blue economy and coastal resilience?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank for the organizers for the invitation today. It's an honor to be here. Also so close to the Red Sea, where a lot of the inspiration around the work that we do is coming from. So from UNDP, and I may repeat a little bit what has been said already this morning, and I feel when we think around the sustainable development agenda, there's one element that for me it's extremely clear. It's the fact that no government in the world will be able to drive this on its own. And this means that we need to crowd in the private sector. We need to crowd in the civil society into this agenda. And one of the ways of crowding in the private sector certainly is going to be through financing, to figuring out how to allocate the resources into private initiatives that can make economic sense. So in terms of that, I think there's two elements that we like to think around. First of all, what needs to be financed? And what needs to be financed are either new activities that allow us to create this transformation into the blue and green economies. And on the other end, we need to understand what are the externalities, what is the value that all this nature provides to us. And I like to think of the example, for example, of the coral reefs and how the coral reefs support the fisheries, support the tourism industry, and all these other elements that turn around this that may also need sort of this financing. So when we think around this financing, what we have been seeing is that we need to start crowding, and there's I would say there's a lot of of resources that are ready to be going to these initiatives, but somehow, first of all, we need to think around how to identify them and then how to provide them access to these financing mechanisms. And therefore, as we're thinking around financing, there's this idea around the de-risking, which is extremely important. Why? First of all, because if I were a fisherman that needs to adopt new technologies around nets and fishing techniques and so on, I'm a vulnerable person, and I need to take this financing decision, accessing a loan that will allow me then to access this new technology. I mean, if you needed to invest around 90% of your assets, or what you have, let's not speak technically here, if you need to invest 90% of what you have, would you do it if something goes wrong and you're going to lose everything that you have? Or would you just stick to the things that you have been doing the way you have been doing it without changing? And this brings this idea then of like, we need to help to de-risk this decision of taking this next step into my new way of doing my livelihood activity, but in a way that allows me to continue if something goes wrong. And this is the sort of where we see that insurance is needed, to de-risk, to take away this uncertainty from people's decisions into moving into these new activities and new segments. So this isn't like for me to access a loan. When it comes to financial institutions, what we are seeing is that despite there being plenty of funds and institutions that are trying to finance, there's no risk appetite for this bigger risk. Why? Because the risk of no payment back because something goes wrong is extremely high still when we're thinking around this transition to climate change, so to transition to a blue economy. Therefore, we also need to be thinking around this elements on like, how do we help the financial sector to think around the risks that are happening down there where the economic activity, down there where people are really creating the real change? And how can we then use this de-risking in order to trigger the financial flows that could be going to these different elements? So what we are seeing then is that the de-risking mechanisms, from my perspective, had three elements. First of all, we need to be protecting from the losses that could be going into the elements that we are investing into these new technologies, new mechanisms for livelihoods and so on. We cannot put money where we know that we're maybe losing it. Then the second role of insurance could be around we need to use it as a way to trigger the financial resources that need to go where we want them to go. And this means that we need to then take away the risk. And finally, it is this idea of behavioral elements. Can we really help people to take these behavioral decisions around moving to change the way I do my livelihood, to change the way where I invest, where I need to invest, and drive this change. So from UNDP, we have been doing a couple of things. In terms of activating resources that work towards the blue economy, we have worked in countries like Indonesia, but also in regions like Latin America, trying to help to structure these blue bonds, which are pretty much mechanisms in which we're trying to go to the markets to get resources from private investors. And then the work where UNDP gets more interested is like, can we help to identify these projects, these initiatives, where these resources need to go? Can we work with the financial institutions that would be absorbing these resources that come from a bond issuance that is done in certain countries and channel those to the right private financial institutions, national public financial institutions, and also to the right kind of projects where these projects would be making a difference. So I think that's an interesting thing around thinking of blue bonds, of saying like, we need to tap where resources may be available, but we need to create channels or funnel these resources into the right kind of initiatives, into the right kind of institutions that would be driving this sort of elements. So I would say that's when it comes to the idea of blue financing. When it comes to the idea of insurance, I think we've been doing a couple of things that I think are extremely interesting, like what we've been doing, for example, in Indonesia, where we have been working with local authorities, but also with fisheries, with the tourism industry, in order to identify what is the positive impact of coral reefs in the local economy. Once we did that, we realized that hotels would have an interest in paying for this insurance to care for the reefs because their activity depends from the reefs. We see that fisheries also are very aware that they need to keep the reefs healthy because the amount of fish depends from the reefs being healthy. And finally, the local authorities also see the benefits because taxpayers' money in the local community is really much depending from the tourists that are coming to visit this sort of diving regions that we have in Indonesia. So based in organizing all this, we could call it local governance, we can figure out how to, first of all, organize all these different interests, because the fishermen have one agenda, the hotels have another agenda, the local communities may have another agenda, but they have a common dependency from this nature. So organizing this dependency from this nature allows us then to figure out how to work together with the insurance industry and design a parametric insurance product that will be creating a compensation mechanism when certain indicators around water temperatures, storms, and so on happen, to release resources to the fisheries, to the communities, to the hotels, to be able to take care of both the conservation of the reefs, but also of the creating a compensation for the different economic activities that would be suffering from these reefs. So, I mean, we think this idea is extremely interesting. Why? Because when we look at the Red Sea, we see a very similar situation where there's communities, economic activities that depend from these reefs that could benefit from these elements. And when we think around the Red Sea, we also, as we were sort of running our thinking around that, is like there's an extra risk around, for example, oil spills and how they could damage the reefs and how we could enable the resources that could prevent or like could allow us to respond to any damages happening from oil spills into the nature. So based on all these elements over the past year, and this is a rather new line of work for us, so there's been I wouldn't say a steep, but it's a very interesting learning process in which we have developed a guidance document, where we try to really take all the lessons that we have taken globally around all these sort of initiatives, where we try to identify how insurance can be developed in order to create these better compensation mechanisms that would allow both communities, governments to benefit from financial resources that allow us to conserve and preserve nature, but also to create a mechanism for compensation for households.
Great, thank you, Miguel. From what you've said, I've picked the importance of private sector investments, and you raised some very valid points around how to de-risk these investments, especially with the role of insurance and blue bonds. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and Dr. Ahmed, I have a question for you around a couple of things. As a marine biologist working closely with national policymakers, how can scientific evidence and the protective role of coral reefs, mangroves, and wetlands be translated into actionable data that financial institutions and insurers can use to price risk and incentivize conservation?
Thank you very much to give me the opportunity to attend with you in this event. And I will talk about, from my vision as marine biologist, and staying most of my life underwater with the marine environment. And because we are in Arab forum, and we are in Arab country, we have a lot of Arab people, so please let me talk in Arabic.
Yes.
And maybe sometimes in English, okay?
Yes, please.
Thank you. عشان نقدر نحسب المهددات او تكلفه الحاجات دي كلها، خلينا نعرف الاول من اهميه الشعاب المرجانيه كاهميه بيئيه. الاول اللي هي بتعتبر تقريبا الهابيتات او المسكن لاكثر من 33% من اسماك الشعاب المرجانيه، من انواع الاسماك المتعارف عليها في العالم. احنا عندنا حوالي 21,000 نوع، يعني تقريبا 4,000 نوع منهم يمثلوا تقريبا 33% من هذه النسبه تقطن اسماك الشعاب المرجانيه. تكون شعار مجاني. معنى الكلام ده ايه؟ يعني كل ما كان نسبه الكورال دي اكتر وهيلسي اكتر وصحتها كويسه، كل ما هتكون اعداد هذه الاسماك وانواعها كتير، كل ما قلت هتقل معاها. نفس الكلام تعتبر ماسكه ان حوالي 25% من انواع الكائنات البحريه الاخرى. برضه معنى الكلام ده ايه؟ كل ما كانت الكورال هيلسي وصحتها كويسه ومفيش عليها مشاكل، كل ما كانت هذه النسبه كبيره. كل ما هتقل معاها بالظبط. عشان كده كل البيزنس بتاعها او قيمه الكورال ريفز هتزيد وتقل، هتاثر علينا، لازم تتحسب كبادجت وكريسك وانشورنس ليها. من الناحيه الايكونوميه او الناحيه الاقتصاديه ليها، اللي هي تعتبر برضو بتحمي الشواطئ من اعمال النحل. لو انا هعمل كيلو متر من الشواطئ لحمايه البيئه الشاطئيه من الاسمنت، او بعمل كيلو صناعي مثلا من الكورال ريف صناعي، هيكلف ملايين الدولارات جدا يعني، لكن هي موجوده بشكل طبيعي، فبالتالي هي بتوفر القيمه الاقتصاديه دي. تمام. بالاضافه ان الكائنات الموجوده معاها بيتم استخراج منها العديد من المواد الحيويه بتدخل في صناعه الادويه، ودي كبزنس ليها قيمه عاليه. معنى الكلام ده برضه هندي امثله عندنا في مصر، واعتقد نفس الامثله دي موجوده في الدول العربيه حتى في الجانب الاخر من البحر الاحمر. يعني مثلا لو احنا بننزل مثلا من سنتين فاتوا في بعض الاماكن في البحر الاحمر كانت كورال جاردن ايفري وير. اوكي. لما نيجي السنه اللي فاتت ننزل نلاقي الكورال جاردن دي، الكورال دي نلاقيها اصبحت لونها ابيض من البليتشنج او التاثيرات البشريه. طبعا ده يدي انذار بالخطر. وستيل الكائنات البحريه لسه موجوده. لما نيجي ننزل نفس السنه دي هذا العام في نفس هذه الاماكن ونلاقي الكورال ده اصبح بلاك يعني الوت اوف الجي، يعني طحالب موجوده فيها بشكل كبير، ده معناه هدر كبير جدا للمواد عندنا وفقد لكل الاهميات اللي احنا قلناها دلوقتي كاهميه بيئيه او اهميه اقتصاديه. نقعد نمشي كتير جدا ممكن ما نلاقيش حاجه عايشه. طبعا ده بعض الاماكن مش كل الاماكن، ولكن انا بدي امثله ان البحر مصر زيها زي اي دوله بتتعرض للمخاطر والمهددات على المواد البحريه، اللي لو مش لحقناها في وقت هي تبقى اسرع مننا ويحصل تدمير ليها. ده لما تكتر مثلا هذه الطحالب وبتدي، فبالتالي طب فين الاسماك اللي بتتغذى عليها؟ مش موجوده. هندخل عامل الصيد على هذه المنطقه، ندخل كده اسواق السمك في الغردقه او في الاماكن الاخرى هنلاقي مليانه اعداد كبيره جدا من بارود فيش او اسماك البغبغاء اللي هي بتاكل هذه الحشائش البحريه. يعني انا في نفس الوقت عندي مشكله والشعب بتموت وتكتر عليها الطحالب البحريه اللي بتمنع ان المرجان ينمو اكتر، وبتمنع ان المرجان الجديد يقعد على القاع الصلب مره اخرى، وبالتالي كمان اصطاد كمان هذه الكائنات. اعتقد في اكشن لازم يتاخد بسرعه جدا عشان حتى اقلل من كثافه هذه الطحالب البحريه، عشان ادي فرصه للكوره تعمل لها ريكفري تاني. يعني احنا في المتحف المصري الجديد اعلنا ان مصر بتستهدف لزياده اعداد السياحه من 15 مليون الى 30 مليون او 50 مليون. طيب الناس دي لما هتيجي هتدخل كم مليون هيروح للبحر؟ هل البحر مستعد يستقبل هذه النسبه؟ اذا ده بيزنس جاي، خطه الدوله البيزنس جاي دلوقتي. لو جم ونزلوا لقوا ان البحر ما فيش فيه الكائنات البحريه، ما لقوش فيه الكورال ريف ده، يبقى انا كده اديت رساله خطا، الناس هتنزل مش هتلاقي الكورالز دي، يبقى انا كده فقدت البيزنس اللي الدوله متوجهه ليها، انا كده فقدته. يبقى لازم نشتغل على هذا الفاكتور من دلوقتي عشان اضمن سكيور وانشورنس للموارد دي، عشان تقدر تحقق هدف الدوله اللي بتطلع عليه. ما يجيش واحد بيبني من جهه وواحد بيهدي من جهه. الدوله عايزه تزود الدخل بتاعها من هذه الموارد البحريه اللي هي تعتبر اموال ثابته، ولما يجوا ينزلوا يلاقوا ان مفيش حاجه موجوده يبقى احنا كنا بنقول كلام مش صحيح. الجزء الثاني للكورال ريف الموضوع الدمج. انا قلت قبل كده ان التاثيرات البشريه اخطر على البيئه البحريه من الكلايمت تشينج حقيقه. على حتى تاثير الكلايمت تشينج ممكن بياخد وقت خلاص، انما انا ممكن واحد ينزل يكسر في الشعب، في اماكن بيكون فيها تكسير بشكل كبير جدا، والمستعمرات المتكسره بتبقى لسه عايزه بس حد يديها الامل او ياخد بايديها ويعيد يثبتها تاني، يعمل لها اعاده تاهيل. احنا عندنا فرق ما بين الكورال ترانسبلانتيشن والكورال ريستوريشن، في فرق بين الاثنين. خلاص ترانسبلانتيشن انا هنقل حاجه ستراكشر بيست، هشيل من هنا احط هنا، فاتليست الاماكن اللي فيها كورال ريفز ومتكسره بس ستيل لايف اثبتها مكانها تاني، احافظ على نفس الفاكتور، نفس العمق، نفس الحراره، نفس كل حاجه، يبقى انا كده حافظت على الموضوع ده. ترجع الهابيتات تاني بقى اللي احنا قلنا عليها نسبه الاسماك والكائنات تاني خلاص. انما المناطق اللي تم تدميرها بالكامل بما فيها الهارد سبستريت زي مثلا عن طريق شحط المراكب او الدينامايتس والحاجات دي كلها، انا فقدت القاع الصلب المناسب للمرجان، فبالتالي مش هينفع معاه ترانسبلانتيشن، ينفع معاه ريستوريشن. لما اقول ريستوريشن يبقى انا بقصد الاستراكشر بلس الفانكشن، الايكو سيستم نفسه. فبالتالي دي لازم باخد ريفرنس سايت جنبه واشوف اعمل له سيرفي الاول، ايه اللي موجود، الانواع اللي موجوده، احجامها، المسافات بين المجتمعات وبعضها، الكائنات الاسوشيتيف الموجوده، عشان اعمل زيها في المكان اللي تم اختفائه تماما. احنا عندنا اماكن في البحر الاحمر اختفت من القرى الريف للاسف. تمام؟ فبالتالي دي برضو محتاجه شغل تاني بس من ناحيه الايه؟ الريستوريشن. خلاص؟ ده بالنسبه للقرى الريف. اعتقد المانجروف احنا ما عندناش مهدد كبير قوي عنده في مصر باستثناء بعض الاماكن تتعدى على الصوابع يعني نتيجه الايكو توريزم. بعض السياح بيجوا بيتبسطوا قوي بيه، بيحبوا يمشوا يدخلوا جوه المانجروف نفسه، ممكن يكسروا الجذور يقعدوا على الترانكس او الجذور بتاعته فبتتكسر بعض الاماكن. هو الحمد لله عندنا بس مكان واحد بس هو اللي فيه هذه المشكله، لكن بعض الاماكن اعتقد ما فيش فيها مشكله، الا اذا بقى لو حبينا نطور فيها الاماكن فقط اللي فقدت عبر الزمن من خلال صور الساتلايت نقدر نعمل لها ريستوريشن تاني للمانجروف، ولكن ليس نعملها في اماكن اخرى ما كانش فيها مانجروف قبل كده عشان ما يحصلش ديستربنس للكورال ريف ايكو سيستم او الاماكن البيئات المجاوره. عندنا بيئات اخرى برضه غير الكورال ريف والمانجروف، الاماكن الكائنات البحريه الكبيره الحجم واللي فرضت نفسها علينا في السنوات الاخيره زي مثلا الدرافيل والدجونج او عروسه البحر او القطم او اسماك القرش. عندنا احنا لسه منزلين بحث جديد دولي عاملاه CMS، اوكي؟ كنا بقى الحمد لله كنت من ضمن احد 70 باحث على مستوى العالم، عملنا تحديث لتقرير مع اخر حاجه كان من 20 سنه، لسه نازل حديثا. عندنا اعداد الدجونج بتقل جدا في العالم، تقل جدا، يعني هو ده وجوده في IUCN ريد ليست بالنرب المهدد لسه من حوالي سنتين ثلاثه المنطقه بتاعت شرق افريقيا اصبحت كريتيكالي اندنجرز، يعني خلاص شرق افريقيا قريب جدا من البحر الاحمر، يعني انا ممكن افاجئ بعد كده يطلع بكره يقول لك البحر الاحمر اصبح كريتيكال اندنجر للدجون. ما كانش في حد بيهتم بيه من السياحه، اما اجي مثلا مكان زي في مرسى علم زي مثلا مرسى هيلمز الاقي كل المراكب السبيد بوتس في السايتس اللي حواليها بيطلعوا يغطسوا على الشعب بس وهم راجعين يعدوا عليها الاقي بالثمان 10 مراكب فوق دجونج واحد، ننزل نغطس معاه اللي بدا يطلع ياخد نفسه مش قادر ياخد نفسه. المفروض بيقضي 60% من وقته في الغذاء على السي جراس، اوكي؟ لما يقضي حوالي 50% فقط او 45%، في 15% كان المفروض ياكل فيهم ما اكلهمش. حولها الى سلوك اخر زي الترافلنج ان هو يهرب من الناس، يحولها الى ريستنج اون ذا بوتم، ينام على القاع، كل ما يطلع ياخد نفس يلاقي الناس فوق ينزل ينام تاني. خلاص؟ احنا قدرنا عدده في مصر حوالي 80 واحد، وده برضه عدد قليل جدا، ولو تم تقديره تاني هيطلع اقل من كده بكتير. تمام؟ اخر حاجه الشاركس طبعا برضو من الحاجات اللي ظهرت حديثا في السنوات الماضيه. الناس برضو ما تعرفش ان مع ارتفاع درجات الحراره كل الكائنات اللي بتتحرك رحلت البيئات بتاعتها شمال وجنوب خط الاستواء عشان توصل للبيئه المناسبه ليه. فان احنا لما نكتشف ان في كائنات ما كانتش بتظهر ظهرت عندنا، ولما اشتغلنا عليها الابحاث على القروش مثلا عملنا ابحاث عليها، لانها بتظهر الاناث اكتر بدايه من شهر 8 كموسم التزاوج لظاهره اسمها الفلوباتي عشان تكون بعيده عن الذكور للحمايه الاجنه بتاعتها. خلاص؟ وده كان بيدي يعني كونكلوجن ليه القروش بتقرب الى الشواطئ في بعض شهور من السنه. فطبعا الناس ما تعرفش الحاجات دي، فلما تنزل في اماكن ما تعرفش تتعامل معاها تحصل الحوادث ويحصل الشارك اتاك. هي حوادث عارضه لان الناس ما تعرفش هذه السلوك. فاعتقد لازم حضراتكم ان احنا اتمنى من الفوريوم ده ان احنا نطلع بحقائق اون ذا جراوند تطبق على ارض الواقع في اسرع وقت قبل فوات الاوان. شكرا. ثانك يو.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. You touched on the importance of data to protect natural assets, especially with various risks they face. I think what's important as well is that how the data can be used by the insurers to price the risk. Miguel, I'm just going to ask you, related to that point, after what Dr. Ahmed has just said, how can we use that data more effectively to support insurers to price that risk?
I would say that data is extremely important. It is it is the basis for all insurance calculations. So the more that we create this interaction between public authorities and civil society, because I think sometimes when it comes to nature conservation, that happens a lot together. What we can start to create is a correlation between certain specific phenomena that could be linked to climate, but also to human action, and what's the impact that it's having on nature itself. And this allows us then to start what in insurance terms we would be calling modeling. But modeling is pretty much being able to put a price tag into the damages that either climate or human activity may be having on nature, and what are the resources needed then to create that? Because that's what's going to make an insurance product relevant in this case. Being able to get payouts that allow us to really be able to take action. I think we just heard a lot of the different activities that can take place in order to recover and restore nature. But then there's the importance of being able to have enough resources and to create a link between this kind of financial initiatives that are trying to allocate resources, but that these resources need to flow into the right segments of the public sector, of the conservation organizations that would be applying them into nature.
Thank you, Miguel. On the de-risking side, Renata, I'm going to come to you. As a mission-driven investment institution, how do you assess the bankability of nature-based projects that deliver public goods, such as coastal protection and biodiversity conservation that we heard Dr. Ahmed speak about? And this is a two-part question. And the second part, what kinds of blended finance structures are most effective for scaling these solutions? Is there a role for insurance?
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here. Before I answer the question, I'll try to explain a bit what the organization is that I work for, which will help explain why I'm answering the question this way. BWB is a nonprofit that was set up about 10 years ago by people in investment banking. And the idea was to use the skills that we have learned in investment banking and implement them in high-impact projects. Because we see that a lot of the times there's a translation issue between the public and the private sector. And as we've already heard today, and I think this is, one of the biggest issues, is there's just not enough public money to get to where we want to be with the climate. So we will need to increase the private sector involvement. So with that in mind, that's also kind of how we look at bankability. So our main lens is from our work in the private sector, and of course one of the big things there is to get the risk and reward in balance, and that would make a project bankable. That does not mean there's a specific return that is asked, but it needs to be in balance with the risk that the investor is taking. One of the ways that we start when we look at nature-based solutions projects is through revenue streams. We try to see, are there any revenue streams here, or are there creative ways where we could create revenue streams for these projects? A lot of the projects that I personally work on are in Europe, but a lot of my colleagues work in Africa and Asia as well, and now setting up in South America. But one thing that we see everywhere is that for nature-based solutions, there's not a lot of traditional financial return. So we like to think about things like biodiversity credits or ecotourism that we can put into the project to try to get some financial returns. For example, there's a project in Spain called La Maleza. It's a wildlife reserve, a nature park, that they have tried to, well, they loaned 13,000 euros from a blended fund. It's called Rewilding Europe Capital. It has institutional and philanthropic investors. So they also have institutional investors that request a return on the loan. And what they did is they started a safari with a 4x4 that give tourists a tour of the park. And they have these very special animals called tauros. They're sort of cows, which people love to see. And these animals are reintroduced into this wildlife preserve because of their ecological necessity. And now that is how they pay back their loan. And this is one example of how you can get some revenue streams to projects that maybe don't necessarily have them naturally. Another thing that we try to look at is if there is no revenue stream, are there costs that are being saved by doing this? And I think this is a big topic for the insurance sector as well, and how insurance comes in, prevented cost. That can be a great benefit, of course, as well. And how can we price that today to make sure that the benefit is seen from avoided cost. Mangroves are a very good example of flood damage that can be avoided by investing in this. And how can we make private investors who also benefit from this see their value upfront? The third one has also kind of been mentioned, which is impact measurement. It's very important to think of other co-benefits, for example, that come from these projects, other things that people and as well the private sector as well benefits from. And the more we can measure this, the better we can put a value on this, and the better we can convince the private sector that it's worth investing in this, because, for example, better health for people, better air quality, also leads to less sick people, less cost to the medical sector, etc. So I think this is something where we should work together a lot with the academic sector as well to see what we can do in predicting these and measuring these co-benefits. And then for the second part of the question, looking at blended finance, this is one of the things that we do every day because we are trying to get more private sector involved, and the best way to make this happen is through blended structures. Because as I was saying, the risk and return need to be balanced, and one great way to make sure that the risk is lowered if you cannot increase the return is by de-risking, and this is an amazing spot for the public sector or philanthropic sector to come in and really try to make sure that it's still a feasible and bankable project. Of course, there are different ways to do this. The insurance has also already been mentioned, but other ways are also first loss guarantees. If you have some kind of securitization structures, first loss tranches to be absorbed by the public sector, or technical facilities assistance, setting up and providing the, let's say, pilot case to prove that this is a bankable project and that being carried by the public sector. One example that we have is the Agri-3 Fund, which is a fund that is backed by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, public sector, and philanthropic capital, conservation philanthropy. And what they do is they de-risk loans in the agricultural sector. One that I know that they did was a $20 million loan to a family farm in Brazil, where this family farm needed the loan for soil restoration, and they got the loan from Rabobank, which is a commercial lender, but they would not have gotten the loan without, at the return that they could afford, without the Agri-3 Fund giving a first loss guarantee to the bank. And together, the private sector could lend money at a decent rate to this business. So I think these are, all different ways to get it done, and some examples.
As mentioned earlier, on this panel we have a diverse representation of government, development finance, insurance, science, and investment. From your respective perspectives, what do you see as the most critical enablers needed to advance this space? We spoke about private sector, but I think we can go a bit deeper than that. What specific actions, partnerships, or policy shifts are required to move from promising pilots to scale large-scale investable solutions for coastal and marine resilience?
Maybe I'll take the microphone first. I think one of the main challenges that we see is that I think the theory of saying we all need to work together, and governments and private sector and civil society, it is true, but from the public sector perspective, I believe we are still, and from the UNDP perspective, we're still trying to change the frameworks and the policies that allows us to do certain elements. And I mean, and for me, the example, and it comes from the region, is in Jordan, where there used to be a compensation mechanism by the government, by Ministry of Agriculture, but that was not enabled by the law to be able to work with the private sector. So it still had, and the policy making that maybe dates from some decades ago, that the state had the obligation to create the resources, to create compensation mechanisms. And therefore, a great part of the work is to start reforming public policies, rewriting laws in order to bring the perspective of like, how can the government better work with the private sector, with the civil societies to carry a lot of this work. And we enable takaful into the public policies so that this kind of financial services can be integrated into a policy. So everything that, from the public perspective, that starts to redefine the collaboration among public, private sector, I think it's extremely necessary, enabling that. I think the other element is on the regulatory side of things. Sometimes many of the solutions that are coming from the private sector need to be properly regulated. And this comes from this idea on like how much, when you're working with the private sector, therefore you're going to have different rules into figuring out from the public perspective on how will you be tendering certain elements with the private sector. What is the profitability of this kind of business? It's not like the private sector needs to lose money, but from the public perspective, there's going to be an element, and that requires for policymakers, for governments, to rethink a lot of the frameworks in which they're used to work, and rethink the way that they will be creating these bridges to tap into the capacities of the private sector, and in particular, in this case, I would say, of the investors, of the financial industry, and how the financial industry can step in to start providing resources to many projects, to many elements, where initially you would have only thought that it is the public sector that is going to be pouring its resources into it.
Thank you, Miguel. I'll just continue with the mic flowing through to Dr. Ahmed. Great.
Thank you very much. I can talk in English this time, no problem.
Yes, I'll just repeat the question.
No.
You're good.
I
Okay.
understand. No worry, I can talk in the English this one.
Okay, great.
No problem. Good question, thank you very much. And I can suggest one solution, or we can say it's my dream or a suggestion. We can apply it for any country, not only in Egypt, any Arabian country, for example. My dream is to create a national team from all the people dealing with the marine environment. So we can identify all stakeholders and make analysis for all stakeholders, okay? And collect all of them together as a one team for a country. For example, all the resorts along the Red Sea, for example, each resort should to have a marine environment team from the resort, from the diving center inside the resort, okay? And they take their salary from the owner itself. If they move, so one can replace, and so on and so on. Why? To ensure the continuously of the team, because we suffer from the experienced team. Some people can take experience in the environment, after that they left their country to other country and so on, so the project is stopped. Their salary from the owner itself. So when you collect all this team, we can make a connection with the Ministry of Environment, Authority, NGO, everything, private sectors, and encourage all the information and give all the information to all of this team, train them very well, how to collect the data from the marine environment. We need to collect the data. This is what the policy maker or what the decision makers need. We need the information updated all the time, okay? This year is different from the last year. This month is different from the last month, okay? Once we collect all this team, we have already trained very well, and we can make assessment for all the marine environment in this country. Okay. After that, apply on the ground all the conclusion or the results to apply on the ground, and after that, monitor every time, at least 2 times per year. Okay. By doing this suggestion, I think we can deal with any change in the marine environment in the short and long term. For example, one example, we can also involve the local community and the fishermen and so on, okay? Because, for example, if we a little bit stop the fishing activity only on the herbivorous fishes like parrotfish, surgeonfish, and so on, only this kind of fishes, to allow the marine environment to recover itself naturally. So all the herbivorous fish will clean all the algae besides the coral reef, so allow the corals to grow and on the space, and allow the new coral recruitment to settle again, and so on. By this action, we can ensure the recovery of marine environment in the coral reef. When the coral reef is recovered, so everything will be recovered. Fishes, other marine environment, and so on. And I hope finally from this forum to do something on the ground, because really we suffered alone. Our curve is going down, but nothing is impossible. Last week, we received the good news on the status of the green turtle on the IUCN red list from vulnerable to least concern, and now we can see the population increase. So this is one of the outcome success we can apply for other marine organisms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Renata.
Thank you. It's a bit boring, but I fully agree with both Miguel and Dr. Ahmed on what they have said. I think, yeah, the most important thing is, of course, to work together, but I think the private sector should be incentivized and should be pushed to be incentivized to do much more than they are doing. Right now, the main incentive for the private sector on decision-making is financial returns, and I think with just that, we're not going to get the involvement that we need. So policy and regulation really needs to step up to push them in the right direction. For example, the hotels on the coast, I think that they should have the responsibility to invest in where they are profiting from. And this is something that policy and regulation will need to push, because unfortunately, they're not going to all do that from their own motivation. So yeah, I do think that I'm not a policy expert at all, so I will leave that to the experts, but I do think that there are changes to be made there to make sure that we get to the volume and the scale that we want to get with the private sector.
Great. Thank you all for your points. The real-time data, importance of real-time data, the importance of public sector and policies, and the importance of private sector and the incentives for private sector. I'm going to refer back to the screen and see if Ariane can now join us to give us a few points. There is just a slight delay, so we'll just give her a minute.
Can you hear me now? Well, I'm going to start. I hope you can all hear me. I apologize for the technical complexity, and I'm very thankful for UNDP to have me in this panel, and I will hope to bring very concrete example of nature insurance. So first, I belong to an entity called AXA Climate. What we do is focusing on climate adaptation, and we develop for our clients risk analysis and parametric insurance that was already a little bit discussed in this panel. We acknowledge that the role of nature is crucial as disaster risk reduction. So we talked about mangrove, providing natural barriers to the coastal assets, coral reef reducing wave energies up to 97%. And insurance companies are convinced by these figures, right? We have the science, we have the data to prove that natural assets are part of the adaptation solutions we need to deploy to increase the coastal resilience. However, past examples of using nature to decrease insurance premium haven't proven successful so far. Why? Because there is this gap regarding the timeline issues. Let's imagine you have today a healthy coral reef or a healthy mangrove barriers around your coast. Then the role that this ecosystem is playing as a barrier is already integrated in the level of risk that the insurer will evaluate for this area. So there is no reason from the insurance perspective to decrease the premium because the risk is not decreased, is as it is. Now let's imagine that the ecosystem is degraded because of human activities, because of a storm, and no longer efficiently play its role of protection. And then, yes, restoring it will decrease the exposure of the assets behind the mangroves, let's say, and then the risk will decrease and the insurance premium will decrease. It will not happen overnight, however, right? It will need years of restoration activities. And insurance companies today are not ready to decrease the premium for a risk that will only decrease in 5-7 years. An avenue that we are exploring today at AXA Climate is how we can protect nature directly. So I heard from the previous talk of Dr. Ahmed Shawki this idea of insuring coral reef. So this is what we've been developing here at AXA Climate. And the way we are doing it is using parametric insurance product to release money very fast and restore as quick as possible the degraded ecosystem following a tropical cyclone, for instance, or following a marine heat wave. What is important to keep in mind is that insurance can only intervene after an acute climate event, something unforeseen, something that we cannot predict. Insurance can't be used for a trend event. Parametric insurance is very powerful because we use satellite imagery to trigger very fast, in just a few days, the insurance money after a marine heat wave, for instance, and it's also tailored to the project specificities, right? It means that we can use the insurance money to finance the cost to repair the marine area that has been evaluates the damages of business interruptions. So I heard in the previous talk about the link between, for instance, ecotourism or fishing activities with a healthy ecosystem. When we design the insurance product, business interruption can be integrated for all related economic activities that are directly dependent to the ecosystem health. Going now to what I heard on how we can value in the insurance company the value of the natural ecosystem. One important element to keep in mind is that the higher the value of the insurance is, of the insured asset is, the higher the insurance premium will be. And this is a challenge, right? So the avenue that we are taking now is not integrating the entire value of all the co-benefits provided by the ecosystem, but only the restoration cost and the business interruption. Insuring natural assets is also very powerful to secure the investment. So that was already discussed with impactful example provided by Renata. But with our experience, we could accelerate, I would say, natural investment in the Philippines. So there, since 3 years now, we are covering a marine protected area manager called Blue Alliance against tropical cyclone. So concretely, up to $250,000 might be triggered in just a few days after a cyclone if it comes by where the marine protected areas are, and this money will be used by the area manager to deploy an emergency response into the reef directly, and also to maintain the salaries of the local communities employed by the MPA manager, paying back for damaged boats, damaged infrastructure, etc. What is interesting in this specific use case is that the insurance component played a significant role in the blended finance vehicle that Blue Alliance, the MPA manager, built to raise money for the development of the MPA. One of the key investors of this blended finance vehicle is the French bank BNP Paribas. When discussing with them, we understood that for them, the climate threat, which is quite important in the Philippines, was mitigated thanks to the insurance product from an investment perspective. So this was just to share very concrete examples of how we can merge insurance component with the investment component to trigger more, to accelerate, I would say, investment into natural capital. As I can't really hear you in the room, I'm not sure how much time I have left, but what I would like to emphasize on is that when I started a few years ago, only 2 nature insurance programs existed, the one in Quintana Roo and the Marfund. And now what we see is around 10, 15 nature insurance programs worldwide, either implemented or in development. So yes, this is progressing, I would say, even if there is still a lot of work to be done. At AXA Climate, we are directly involved in 5 different programs for nature. So the Marfund, where we are protecting the Mesoamerican reef against tropical cyclones, Blue Alliance in the Philippines that I just mentioned. We are also ensuring a community that lives out of mangrove restoration in Mexico. Now we are ensuring the coral reef in Colombia, so not yet in Egypt, but maybe soon. And we also worked with UNDP country office in the Maldives to do insurance feasibility study. It's not, the limitation today is not in the product design, right? What we need is collaboration, international collaboration between insurance companies, investors, and conservation actors to deploy products that will reduce the real risk and also the perceived risk. And for me, the topic today is not that much on scalability, but really on replicability. There are some use cases, there are publications around it, so we can learn from each other, and we can definitely make a difference with the insurance product to accelerate the investment potential of nature. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Many thanks to Ariane. I think she raised some very important points. I think one of the ones that I picked up is the importance of ensuring the natural assets and how they also protect investments. At this time, I'm going to turn to the audience. There is an intervention from the floor. So yes, sir, over to you.
Good afternoon to everybody. My name is, I'm the Senator Raisa Murad from Jordan, and I'm very delighted to attend this meeting, and my special appreciation to His Royal Highness Abdulaziz. You touched about Jordan. Actually, I just want to point 4 points regarding this regard. As a matter for, when you talked about the social fund we did have, actually, we had it now under, it is legalized under a certain law since 3 months ago. And there is a budget for this fund, which is allocated from the government and also from percentage of sales of agribusiness in the markets. So, and also a percentage we are taking from imports of agri products to Jordan. And I think this is a very important start for such kind of a fund, which we hope that it could support especially the farmers for certain, like this year, we are facing a big challenge. Your Highness, I just cheered you while you are not here. For instance, this year, we had a very big challenge in Jordan for olive business in Jordan, and we have reduction of production for about 75% down, and this is actually will affect farmers very negatively. So I think this fund, which has been officially and it's been accredited by the Parliament, it's going to be a good start. Second point, while we are talking about risks of finance and all this thing, I'm a chairman of insurance company, and we tried to have coverage for climate change and for agribusiness in Jordan. The main issue, in short, I don't want to tell you, we were having problems with the reinsurance companies, not the insurance in each country, because you know most of the, I mean, all of the business of insurance has to be reinsured by big companies without naming them. And the percentage was very high, and we felt that there was some kind of not touching this kind of business. And I think this is a big issue where we have to, from this forum here, we have to touch that We have to be close with these big companies, because I think this is a big issue now with the climate change, and we have to take it over consideration. Number 3, when you talk about finance, in Jordan we are talking about such kind of, and since more than 6 or 7 years, such kind of finance, which we call green finance, and there is a allocated budget from the central bank through the banks, and approximately it is with 0 interest, 1% or 2%, which is only for administration fees. And now we are touching in Jordan as well the blue economy finance, which is actually is a very important thing, and it's affecting our water or seas resources. So I think this is also, which we started in Aqaba actually, and I think there are my colleagues from Aqaba tomorrow, they will have a session, they can talk more about it, and they are having a very successful programs and plans as well, but I don't want to touch this, but tomorrow they will talk about it. Number 4, I feel what's being affected in this region, it's not a cause from our region mainly. It's a cause what's happening in the climate change. I think we are paying the penalties from other countries affect. Because it's a matter of environment, it's a matter of climate change, and we've been affected by certain countries that is affecting these countries, and we are not getting the rights, and we are not getting our fair compensation to keep our environment and to keep our seas in the good level. I just want to point this, and thank you very much for this important event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Miguel to respond to your points and also just close for us just the key summary points. Thank you.
No, I mean, I really appreciate the intervention from Jordan. It validates one of the things. It raises a final thing, which is around insurability. And can we still insure everything, all the risks that we're facing? And I think that would need a whole different panel, but I think it's worth a question. Just to maybe wrap up, like all the ideas, I think for me there's some key elements. It's like we need more financing if we want to achieve substantial change. And if financing is going to get where it needs to get, we need to work together between the public sector, the private sector, and the civil society. That's going to be extremely important. I think one of the elements that came in the conversation for me is like, we need to measure the impact and understand when we are investing, when we're putting our resources in many of these ideas, are they working? What are they creating is going to be an extremely important element to keep driving the resources where there can be change achieved. Otherwise, we need to find new ones. And finally, I would say the idea of de-risking will be important into driving the economic flows, both from where they are originating and how they can use the financial sector as a funnel, as a mechanism to reach the majorities, to reach the private economy, the MSMEs, the productive sectors. That's going to be extremely important. But we also need to make sure that the risks that all these little projects that all households are facing are taken care of as we're driving them through this transition into a green, into a blue economy. It's going to be extremely important not to leave them alone, just with significant flows going their way. So I think I would wrap it up this way, Shamiso.
Thank you very much, and thank you, panelists, Your Royal Highness. Thank you.
Thank you all for this amazing